Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching the Today I Found Our YouTube channel, and in the video today we're looking at that time that the BBC deleted almost every episode of Doctor Who from its archives. For over half a century, Doctor Who has proven itself to be one of the best-known, most profitable, and most culturally significant series ever produced. Nevertheless, in the 1960s and 1970s, the BBC decided to just up and delete pretty much every episode of the show from its archives. So thorough was this purge that even today there are still 97 episodes that there exists no known copy. For anyone who's managed to avoid the cultural behemoth that is Doctor Who, the show basically follows the adventures of the eponymous Doctor, a time-traveling alien who solves various problems while looking and acting as obnoxiously British as possible. The show has been a staple of British pop culture almost from the moment it first aired in 1963. Of course, its first episode wasn't exactly a ratings smash, as it just so happened to coincide with the news coverage of President Kennedy's assassination, causing many Britons to miss it. This prompted the BBC to air it again a few days later. After this second airing, the show was a smash hit and has been popular in its various incarnations in Britain and beyond ever since. Pertinent to this video is that Doctor Who isn't, and never has been, a show with a small but dedicated following. From basically the first episode, it has always been a consistent performer. It was such a dependable hit that the BBC were reportedly disappointed in the late 80s when individual episodes were only being viewed by an estimated 5 million people, despite being scheduled at the same time as the most popular soap opera in the country. Nevertheless, its massive popularity still couldn't save it from what has come to be ominously known as The Purge. So why did the BBC choose to get rid of so many episodes of one of their most beloved and popular shows? Because up until 1978, that was pretty much what they did with the majority of their broadcasts. The BBC, and most other networks, simply saw no value in keeping copies of much of anything. Early in television's history, the medium wasn't viewed the same way that it is today, with the BBC's own archivist, Adam Lee, likening the mindset of people back then to that of theatre patrons, in that they saw it as something that was transmitted, went out live, and was finished. Even as the technology to record content became available, there was still little perceived value in keeping said recordings after the show had aired. As Lee went on to say, of course, the earliest videotape format, which was 2-inch, was very difficult to use, so they used to do all these programs as if they were live. But then if you had a complete disaster, it didn't matter, you could go back and start again. So it was seen as a production tool, and I think that a really important point to remember is that videotape was not seen as an archive medium, not as a long-term carrier for the television picture. What would happen was, after the program was transmitted, then the tape would be reused again. Further, shows were rarely, if ever, rebroadcast, and the tapes that they were stored on were bulky and costly to store. Beyond that, as Lee mentioned, old tapes could be, and often were, reused for future shows. As a result, it was simply more cost-effective to get rid of any old footage, regardless of what it was. As an example of how short-sighted the BBC were about getting rid of any and all footage of anything they aired, during this period they famously erased much of the footage they had of the moon landing. It wasn't until 2012 that the BBC were able to recover much of their original content of said historical broadcast, thanks to a copy made by an, at the time, 12-year-old viewer who figured coverage of man's first steps on a celestial body other than Earth would probably end up being historically significant. Beyond these issues, the BBC had to contend with the British Actors Union equity. As is so often the case when technology causes a radical shift in the entertainment industry, when pre-recording television broadcasts first became popular, it disrupted the way that business was done before. In this case, to the potential detriment of the actors involved. You see, before this, if the BBC wanted to air a particular episode of something again, they'd have to rehire the actors to perform it live, much like in a play. When recording technology became more sophisticated, Equity fought hard to limit how recordings of shows could be used, often encouraging actors to include clauses in their contracts, preventing a given show they appeared in from being rebroadcast more than a handful of times. In an age before selling copies to consumers was feasible, after this number of broadcasts was reached, the value of the footage to the network effectively became nil, giving broadcasters little financial reason to keep it. Even when they did have the rights to rebroadcast, with the transition to color recordings, even the formerly most valuable of black and white shows were likewise deemed worthless. The whole situation wasn't helped by the fact that there was a miscommunication between the BBC Film Library, which is responsible for maintaining and curating the BBC's impressive massive and extensive library of content, and the BBC itself. Essentially, both entities more or less assumed that the other was keeping copies of the things that were deemed valuable, at least for a while, and as a result, neither thought anything of just deleting content when necessary without any real oversight. In its earliest days, the BBC Film Library was also quite particular when it came to what it would accept, reportedly only deeming anything filmed on, well, film to be worth saving, which was a problem considering most of the BBC's recordings at the time were made on tapes. In addition to wiping the master tapes of countless shows, news broadcasts, and films, film reels containing items that were shipped overseas for international broadcast — it was common practice to copy the tapes to film as it was cheaper to ship and a more universal format — were likewise often discarded if they were returned. Amongst the many casualties of these purges that continued into the late 1970s were most of the Doctor Who episodes produced between 1963 and the early 1970s. This fact was only revealed in 1978 thanks to famed music producer Ian Levine. A huge fan of Doctor Who as a child, Levine managed to get equity in the BBC to agree to let him purchase the copies of the old episodes. Unfortunately, when he showed up at the BBC Film Library to collect, he found most of the episodes gone, and among what remained, some of them were quite literally on the junk heap, ready to be thrown out. Needless to say, he was not so happy with the situation and was soon able to convince BBC execs to cease the practice of junking Doctor Who episodes. They were also particularly intrigued by the fact that this one individual was willing to pay so much money for copies of an old show and had been contemplating the potential of perhaps selling copies of the show to other people via the newly emerging market of home video cassette recordings. At the same time, the BBC Film Library decided to change their rules and allow for the storage of tapes of shows and not just film. When the dust settled and an extensive search was completed, it was found that every master tape copy of the first 253 episodes of Doctor Who had been wiped or thrown away, and there were a full 152 episodes where there existed no film copy in any of the BBC's archives. As you may recall, we said at the beginning of all of this that there are only 97 episodes of Doctor Who missing today. This is largely thanks to the efforts of Levine and various fans of the show who've spent a few decades tracking down lost episodes. These searches have taken said individuals far and wide, from Nigeria to Australia, where copies were found hidden in various TV network archives that still had film copies the BBC had sent them many years before. Beyond this, some of the more unusual places episodes have been found include a garbage dump, a yard sale in New Zealand, and even the basement of a Mormon church. The church building had once been owned by the BBC and inexplicably had 2 episodes of Season 3, episodes 5 and 10 of that season, just lying around. Numerous episodes have also been found in the hands of private collectors who acquired them through various, largely unknown means. Those collectors who've chosen to come forward have subsequently donated or sold their copies to the BBC, in the latter case sometimes for exorbitant amounts. Where the BBC hasn't been able to recover entire episodes, they've been able to cobble together workaround alternatives to the real thing in a few cases. For instance, enterprising young fans of the Doctor, before the days of being able to record the visuals of the episodes from home, did manage to record the audio, and some of these recordings survived the decades since. Where audio has been found, the BBC, and in some cases the fans, have filled in the missing footage with animations synced to the original audio. They've also managed to recreate at least parts of otherwise lost episodes from flashbacks in other episodes, documentaries, and most humorously, national censor boards who cut clips from episodes in accordance with their respective censorship laws, but kept the removed footage, meaning this objectionable material only survived because of their efforts to make sure that it didn't see the light of day. Despite continued efforts by certain individuals and even businesses looking to turn a profit on discovering lost episodes, there are still, as noted, 97 episodes of Doctor Who for which there are no known copies. And if you're wondering, today things are done a little differently at the BBC. Archivist Adam Lee explains, "At the moment, everything is recorded and everything is kept for a minimum of 5 years, but we do exercise a selection policy on that. We keep what you would expect us to keep, so all the drama is kept, all the entertainment is kept, all the very high-value, expensive programs to make. We keep our news, we keep all the current affairs. The areas where we tend to be more selective would be, for example, example, in a long-running quiz show, where it's really important to have examples of that, but we wouldn't necessarily keep them all forever, because when we're talking about keeping something here, we're saying we're going to keep it forever, and that's a big overhead to have. Before we dispose of any material, any TV material, it's always offered to the British Film Institute, and they take a reasonable selection of material they want. We even offer it to them when we've transferred it to a new format, and we ask them if they want to have the original formats too. And then on the radio side, if we're disposing of any material from the sound archive, then that's offered to the British Library Sound Archive. Bonus fact: the famous Star Wars scream, more properly known as the Wilhelm scream, heard in hundreds of movies, was created via the vocal talents of Sheb Wooley. He is perhaps better known for his hit 1958 song Purple People Eater. The genesis of the scream was that Wooley had an uncredited part in the first film the scream was heard in, a 1951 film called Distant Drums. At one point during the film, Captain Quincy is leading his soldiers through a swamp when one of them gets attacked and dragged under by an alligator, screaming in the process. During post-production recordings, Wooley recorded various vocal sound effects for the film, including a batch of screams. So why was it dubbed the Wilhelm scream, if the man who did the scream was named Sheb Wooley? After being plucked from the Warner Brothers stock sounds library, the scream was first used in the 1953 film The Charge at Feather River, starring Guy Madison as Private Wilhelm. The sound effect is used when Private Wilhelm is shot in the thigh with an arrow. The scream was nicknamed Wilhelm from then on. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up below this video, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Also, if you liked it, why not check out some of our other videos, which are over there on the right, and thank you for watching.